So Danny Flexen here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined once again for DiBella's Digest by the man himself, Lou DiBella. Lou, how's your week been?
Not going to complain. Snowed in a little bit. We had 2 major storms since I spoke to you last. But I sort of like watching the snow, and I bizarrely still haven't taken down my Christmas lights on my house, so it looks pretty. I'm all right. I'm okay.
You're like the quirky neighbour who people drive past your house. They're like, whoa, he still hasn't taken those lights down. That's Lou. Good old Lou.
Well, you know what's funny? I live in a quirky area, and I'm not the only one. So if you come down my block, you can see Christmas lights on 4 or 5 homes that we just didn't bother to take it down. But I'll tell you what, in a pandemic, it's sort of nice to see some lights.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to talk to you, first of all, about Teofimo Lopez, someone I know you're a huge fan of and who we've discussed in the past. And everyone's now speculating about his next move. And it seems perhaps it may have to be a mandatory defence of one of his titles against George Kambosos. What do you make?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I promote George. And let me tell you something. George is not going into this fight to lose. George isn't going into this fight believing it's some kind of a mismatch or that he can't win. I've never seen a kid more confident or more excited to get in the ring against another young stud to be able to prove that he's not on a different level. George feels very, very strongly that he is on that he is on that kind of level of the Haneys and the Lopezes and the Ryan Garcias, and that he belongs in those discussions. And the only way he can prove it is in the ring. So he's not going to give up his opportunity as the mandatory. And in fairness to George, and this is lost with a lot of boxing fans, this is a legitimate mandatory. I mean, the kid has fought. If you look at George Kambosos' record, I have not babied him. He doesn't have a Chris Lovejoy record, if you know, of opposition. You know, he's fought some, real decent quality lightweights. And in his last fight, he fought Lee Selby in the UK. I mean, Lee's a terrific fighter. A guy with a pedigree and a track record and a resume. And I thought George clearly beat him on Lee's home turf. And he earned that opportunity. So he's not going to give it up. And I look, I know Gordo, Teofimo, he's not going to want to give up the belt. I mean, he loves being undisputed. He doesn't want to give up the belt. So I think that it will be a Kambosos fight. But let me ask you a question. Are you going to see a Ryan Garcia fight anyway right now? No. Are you going to see a Haney fight right now? No. You're going to see a Gervonta Davis fight right now? No. So, and the kid just fought Lomachenko. So I think it's a perfectly fine fight. And I think my kid is obviously an underdog, but not a dead underdog. He's a live underdog.
When you see Bob Arum, who of course promotes Lopez, say publicly...
I just hung up with Bob Arum 2 minutes before I got on the phone with you, by the way.
And he said publicly not too long ago, well, it's not the biggest fight in the world, kind of as a way of justifying it going to purse bids. What did you make of his comments and the fact that the fight is going to purse bids?
He's negotiating with his own fighter. That's what I made of the comments. I know Bob forever. And look, this is one of the things that's become endearing about Bob at 89 years old. He's 89 years old. Doesn't give a flying fuck. He doesn't give a single fuck about what he says. Bob has no filter right now. And I think he's probably earned the right to not have a filter. Now, that being said, it probably hasn't made his relationship any better with Crawford or Teofimo, but he has no filter. And honestly, I guess these are economically trying times for everyone in boxing, including the promoters and the managers, even including the platforms, the networks and streaming services. It's a difficult time when you're in a pandemic. So it's not shocking to me that an 89-year-old man that's one of the most accomplished promoters in history doesn't give a shit about what he's saying. That's where Bob is right now.
Teofimo said back in November his purses for fights going forward would be $5 million minimum. Do you think he regrets saying that now? I mean, especially in this climate.
I don't know if, look, and there's so much bullshit by fighters on social media now about what the entitlement to X numbers of millions of dollars. I think behind the scenes, I don't know where the kid's at, but I don't think he's insisting necessarily on $5 million for his next fight. I don't know. I think the kid is more reasonable than that. and he's with McWhorter, split team management. They know the business. So I don't think that they're going to I don't think they're going to hold out. They're never going to get a $5 million purse from anybody to fight Kambosos. And frankly, if he was fighting Devin Haney right now, I don't think his purse would be $5 million because it's not a pay-per-view fight. So I mean, does he regret saying that? Lately I've seen less of that from him publicly, and I hope he keeps it that way because I don't think anyone enjoys seeing fighters bantering around crazy numbers on social media. When I see I see Spence and Crawford out there talking about who's the A side and how many, tens of millions they're going to make or whatever. I shrug my shoulders and I say, well, that's why the fight probably won't happen.
Bob's talked about, I may have just said the same thing to you on the phone about making it in New York in June, hoping that.
Yeah, but Bob says a lot of stuff. I don't think anything's happening at Madison Square Garden in June. And I also think Bob knows better than I how he calculates his economics. And I don't know if he's had discussions with the Garden, but it's almost impossible to foresee more than a 25% kind of crowd at the Garden in June. And how do you justify the expenses of now? That being said, it's pretty cheap to get hotel rooms right now and everything else, but I still don't see the economic sensibility of going to the big room at Madison Square Garden with 25% of people. So I think that's a long shot.
Do you see travel restrictions being eased sufficiently to hold it in Australia in the summer?
Well, that's one of the reasons why. I think there's a chance, but I think one of the reasons why the fight wasn't negotiated earlier, I think had there been, there's no COVID pretty much in Australia, but I think their reasoning is part of the reason we have no COVID in Australia is because we haven't eased travel restrictions.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the lack of, not the lack, but the travel restrictions that still exist in Australia was an impediment to maybe making this fight happen in a way that would be most financially satisfying to everybody. But you can't do anything about that. It is what it is.
So where and when do you anticipate it happening? I know the purse bids are next week, but if you were a betting man, you are a betting man.
May or June, probably. I think it's up in the air where it would happen. I think it could happen if something changed in New York, God please, I'll say a prayer when we hang up, that things change here rapidly enough that it could happen at the Garden. I would be thrilled because it would mean I could also reopen my business, basically.
Of course, yeah.
But I'm not too optimistic about that. I think if things change with Australia, that becomes a possibility after the purse bid again. And then I think that it's also possible it might happen in a bubble in Las Vegas. If things haven't moved beyond the 25% kind of realm, I don't think that's out of the question. Though I think that everyone involved, from Arum to our side to Teofimo and his people, I think they prefer to do the fight in front of people.
That's a fight that's set to go to purse bids. Another fight that was scheduled for purse bids but has now been agreed is Demetrius Andrade defending his WBO middleweight title against his mandatory challenger Liam Williams. It's one that they've gone back and forth on social media for ages now, but it's finally been agreed for sometime later this year. What do you make of that fight?
I have a lot more respect for Liam Williams than I had before he beat the hell out of one of my guys. Who's, he fought Alantes Fox when I was promoting Alantes, and Alantes is a real good fighter, and Williams really, really handled him, and his stock went up in my eyes substantially. So I think it's a real fight. But style-wise, I have a really hard time seeing how Williams' style is he's really going to have to get Andrade's attention early and hurt him a little bit. He's going to have to land. He has some power. He showed that in a number of his fights. And I think he's going to have to do something a little bit dramatic in terms of asserting his power to maybe get Andrade into more of a retreat boxing sort of mode. But, on paper, it's hard for me to see Liam winning that fight. But it's certainly a legitimate fight. And I'd love to see it become a real contest. And I think, that if Williams can get on the offense early and get Andrade's respect early in the fight, it could be a really interesting fight. But I would make Andrade a significant favorite.
And something I wanted to touch on before we leave this week's digest, a figure who's caused a lot of talk and speculation in the UK over the last week or two has been Daniel Kinahan. And I'm not entirely sure what the perception is of Daniel Kinahan and his role in boxing in the US. And I was hoping you might be able to help me out with that.
You know, I this is not a subject I love to be speaking about. But look, you know, I want to say this actually. We got a lot of we have had a tolerance for stuff in boxing that doesn't exist in a lot of other sports. So the fact that whatever you think of you know of Daniel Kinahan, the fact that he's a factor and a player in boxing shouldn't be that shocking to anybody, because there haven't been impediments to entry in the history of the sport. You've always had controversial figures emerging as powerful in boxing. Is that something to be proud of? No. But is it reality? Yes. There hasn't been a lot of scrutiny by the American media of Kinahan, and he certainly has a great support among MTK fighters and fighters like Billy Joe Saunders and Fury that feel that they owe him a great deal in terms of advancing their careers. So, I don't exactly know all the reasons. I have some ideas, but there hasn't been a tremendous scrutiny about Kinahan here. The same way, however, there's been criminal activity and people that have been unsavory characters that have been involved in boxing for generations, and most of them remained and were allowed to continue going their merry way without boxing really, with boxing turning a blind eye. But boxing has a long storied history of turning a blind eye.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression that even in the UK and Ireland, outside of people that already knew who Daniel Kinahan was previous, or his reputation at least previous to his involvement in boxing, it hasn't really gone further than that yet. We had a documentary here on BBC, which is a network channel, last week, I think it was, or the week before. And that caused a bit of a kind of ripple in the ocean, if you like, but I'm not sure how significant the coverage has been since then, particularly outside the UK and Ireland.
You know, time I guess will tell, you know, but I see no reason to think that MTK at the moment is not going to continue to be a significant force in boxing, and maybe even a growing force in boxing.
Great stuff. Well, Lou, hope you have a good week. Hope you're not snowed in for the next week.
So do I. Thank you, my friend. I'll talk to you next week.
Always a pleasure. Speak to you soon.